So it turns out, Crash Bandicoot himself may have accidentally created the multiverse. How is this even possible? Let's talk about it.
Whoa!
What's up guys, Canadian Guy here, and back with a brand new video. It's been a long time since I've done a theory video, and I felt like it was about time that I talked about this one. This script that you are listening to was originally drafted in July of 2020. Now, in 2020, we talked a lot about Crash Bandicoot's story and how it affects the Crash Bandicoot timelines. From talking about the fact that all Crash Bandicoot games are canon, but taking place in different timelines, to there being multiple variations of classic characters sprinkled in from Crash's past with these new timelines and dimensions. If you have not seen those videos, I suggest you check them out when you get the chance. Essentially, we were told by the director of the game itself, Paul Yan, that all Crash Bandicoot games are canon, just that each one happened in a different timeline. So the events of Crash the Titans, the events of Twinsanity, the events of Wrath of Cortex, and every other Crash Bandicoot game simply happened in a different timeline from the original 3 games, because all of these different timelines are coexisting within the same space in different dimensions. What has been created is now called the Multiverse. The Multiverse is the base and core concept of the story that is Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time. The basic story is that Uka Uka figures out a way to rip a hole in the multiverse to travel from the distant planet he and his minions were abandoned on back to Earth where Crash and Coco is. Of course, he faints after overexerting so much energy, and Cortex and Entropy take this as an opportunity to push their own plans. Well, Entropy's plans, but you know. Entropy learns how to replicate what Uka Uka did by creating a rift generator, opening quantum rifts throughout the multiverse. But in doing this, the multiverse is kind of, well, unstable. So Crash and Coco have to assemble the quantum masks to bring equilibrium to the multiverse once more. But I got to thinking, who or what created the multiverse? I know, right? Too deep? I mean, this is Crash Bandicoot we're talking about, come on. There is no way that there's an actual logical explanation or theory for this, right? Right? Well, buckle up, because it turns out with the help of ADHD, hyperfocus, and coffee, there very, very much is. So, let us begin. The first and foremost thing that we need to talk about is time. No, this is not a pun on the 4th game title again. Time is a very, very unknown and fragile thing. When left alone, everything is fine. But when manipulated, things can get very, very hairy very, very quickly. Time is also very much a thing that we as a human race are still learning about today, which is why time travel is such a popular thing in pop culture, from Doctor Who, Marvel comics and movies, books, games, you name it. But the crazy thing about time travel is that we don't know what would happen if we actually achieved it. There is a limitless amount of theories for time, but there are 2 theories that we can pluck out because of the fact that Crash Bandicoot's universe introduced a multiverse. The first one is a very basic multiverse theory, which is beyond simple. In the Crash Bandicoot universe, however it was made, it was created with a multiverse in mind. Done. That's it, nothing else. But the second one is a bit different and actually has evidence to suffice for it. I like to call it the timeline split theory, which means that theoretically at one point there was only one timeline, but something happened that caused a fracture in time and space, and because of that fracture, a multiverse was created. But how does one create a second, third, or any number of timelines? By traveling through time and causing a change in the past. It's time to go warped. Crash Bandicoot Warp's plot is that after Cortex's plan quite literally crashes and burns, Uka Uka is freed from his ancient prison. He informs Cortex that there is no more power crystals left on the planet to be able to take over the world. However, he spares Cortex and calls upon an ally called Dr. Nefarious Tropy, or Dr. Entropy, who runs a machine called the Time Twister. The Time Twister allows its user to warp back in time to whatever age they desire. Uka Uka plans to steal the crystals from a different time and era and bring them back to the present. Crash and Coco also travel to the Time Twister to try and get the crystals first before Cortex and his goons. Here's the problem though. If you were to travel back in time, grab a crystal, and go back to the present, you cause a split in reality. The reason why is called the butterfly effect. The butterfly effect is very simple. One tiny action causes another small reaction, but those series of actions will eventually be the cause of a larger reaction to much larger actions. The saying goes, one beat of a butterfly's wing will eventually turn into a hurricane across the world. This simply explains how even the tiniest of actions causes a chain reaction to much larger actions in life. Let's use an example from Toad Village, the very first level in Crash Bandicoot 3, which took place during medieval times. So, because Crash went back in time to grab the crystal before Cortex did, all interactions with that crystal henceforth in this timeline would cease to happen. So, if in the original timeline, maybe some poor peasant found the crystal, then sold it to a salesman to buy food to feed themselves and their family, and then that salesman travels to a far-off city and sells it and becomes very rich, he meets a woman and starts a family. But let's rewind here. Because Crash took the crystal, the peasant never finds it and sells it for food for their family. The salesman never becomes rich and never meets the woman to start a family with, which now means that all interactions with his children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and the rest of his line throughout history is completely gone, causing an infinite amount of changes and differences and completely change history itself to the world and even the universe itself. But because Crash travels back to the present, and there is no difference between the present day and the past, and the fact that the multiverse exists, we can conclude that when Crash comes back with the crystal, he is, unintentionally of course, splitting the timeline. But wait a second, this would be a cause of mass destruction and chaos in the universe. Wouldn't Dr. Entropy know this firsthand? You're right, you're exactly right, and I believe he did. But like I mentioned, Dr. Entropy maintained the Time Twister, overseeing it and making sure that everything would stay in order. Because like I said at the start of the video, time is messy. This is why Uka Uka brought him in on the evil plan to make sure that everything went as smoothly as possible. The Time Twister likely is able to heal the splits in time that are caused by traveling forward and back. But again, it requires delicate care to make sure that order is kept. So, what's the problem? Well, Entropy attacked Crash to take the crystals that he had collected thus far, so Crash really had no choice but to defend himself and to defeat Dr. Entropy. But in doing so, he caused the Master of Time to not be able to oversee the Time Twister and its very delicate use. Now, whenever Uka Uka and Cortex show up in the warped cutscenes, they're always screaming about world domination and how they're gonna crush the Bandicoots at all costs. Except after you beat Entropy. When you beat Entropy, the mood completely changes. It's not the same. Take a look.
You insignificant morons! By defeating Entropy, you have placed us all in grave danger!
Crash, Coco, you must realize that this Time Twister machine is very delicate. Without Dr. Entropy's constant care and control, who knows what it will do?
See how their mannerisms turn? They turn from being angry and confident to upset and scared. There was a very important reason why Entropy was needed for the master plan, but with Dr. Entropy defeated, the delicate Time Twister will no longer receive the proper care it needs. Cortex doesn't even know what the Time Twister will do if Entropy is not there to maintain it. He admits it himself, and in this case, it seems that it has caused the timelines to split. Now, pump the brakes. You might say, come on, this is just something crafted together because of Crash Bandicoot 4, it's about time. This is nothing but a retcon and something silly that was injected in the Crash Bandicoot series for this game. And that is where you are wrong, because now we're going to rewind to Crash Twinsanity. The evil twins, the main antagonists of the game, came seeking to claim a new dimension. We learned that they are from what's called the 10th dimension. When we eventually arrive there, it looks almost identical to the Wampa Islands, except everything is evil and corrupt. But within this dimension, we even see a different Crash Bandicoot, Evil Crash. But in order for there to be a 10th dimension, that means there has to be at least 10 different timelines, which is guessed what? A multiverse. So the multiverse has existed even before the events of Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time. It was established in Crash Twinsanity. Even the concept of dimensional variance in characters, like the different Tanas and entropies introduced in Crash 4, was introduced in Crash Twinsanity. Just like Evil Crash and the Cut Evil Coco being the 10th dimensional variants of Crash and Coco, we learned that in a specific dimension in Crash Bandicoot 4, Crash and Coco are killed by female entropy, and Tana has to survive on her own, becoming essentially a lone wolf hero. Some even suggested that the totally tubular skins are the variants from her dimension. The point is, these concepts and story mechanics have been here since the PlayStation 2 era and is nothing new to the franchise. So let's go over everything. After the events of Crash Bandicoot 2, there were no more power crystals or power sources to be able to go through with Uka Uka and Cortex's evil master plan of world domination. So they decided to get them by traveling through time. To make sure no issues or problems had arisen, they enlisted Dr. Nefarious Tropy and his Time Twister machine. To stop Uka Uka and Cortex from world domination, Crash Bandicoot and Coco also went to the Time Twister machine to collect the crystals first to stop them from taking over the world. But for each crystal that Crash and Coco grabbed and went back to their present time, they would cause a split in the timeline, creating an entirely new dimension. Eventually, Dr. Entropy, the person who has maintained the Time Twister, decided to confront Crash for himself. When Crash Bandicoot defeated the Master of Time, the splits essentially became permanent, and now the multiverse was born. Within those splits, there are different variations of Crash Bandicoot, like Twinsanity Crash, Evil Crash, Crash the Titans Crash, and yes, even Skylanders Crash, all created by accident by the Orange Nutbag himself. There is evidence of this in-game for Crash Bandicoot 4. When you go to Blast from the Past, you can literally see etched in on the rocks in the wood all the different elemental masks that show up in Wrath of Cortex. But Crash 4 is the quote-unquote retcon of Wrath of Cortex. If this were the case, then we wouldn't be seeing the elemental masks in the universe. Then we meet Nitrous Oxide, who has references to the events of Crash Team Racing, but the events of Crash Team Racing would be impossible because Cortex is involved. Cortex in the main universe was sent to a desolate planet. How could he be back on Earth to race against Oxide if he was sentenced to the desolate planet? Then we literally have a frozen world called the 11th Dimension, where it's a subtle reference from the fact that the evil twins came from the 10th dimension. But how many dimensions could there be? Well, in the original timeline in Crash 3, Crash went back in time 27 times to collect the crystals. That would mean that including the original timeline this stems from, there are 28 timelines, but the butterfly effect might have affected other dimensions less than others. It's been subtly confirmed that the Crash that we see in Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time, is not the same Crash Bandicoot that we see in the Insane Trilogy. If you look at the PSN description of Crash 4, one of the lines literally says, "Wait, are those jorts? Not in this universe." Which seems like a small and coy nod to the idea that this is a different Crash Bandicoot from the Insane Crash. However, it's also confirmed that the events of Crash Bandicoot 3 Warp still happened in this universe, which means that there could be yet another 27 splits from this reality. How many timelines have time-splitting events within them? The number could be endless. Crash did what he had to do to save the world, but unknowingly caused split after split after split. It created the timeline for Crash the Titans. It created the timeline for Wrath of Cortex. It created the timeline for all the Crash Bandicoot games. But that means there is a whole multiverse out there, full of danger and evil. Now this arises a bunch of questions. Who created the quantum masks? What are their purpose other than balancing the universe? Were they really created just because Crash Bandicoot ruined everything? Maybe we'll find out in a future video. I know this was a big video, but what do you guys think of this theory? Does it have legs? Comment below and let me know. Thank you so much to all those who not only support the channel, but myself and my family. Because of your contributions, I'm able to do this full time. If you'd like to support the channel, please consider clicking the join button or becoming a Patreon with the link in the description. I also live stream every Thursday and Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Come on by and say hi. Again, thank you to everyone, and I'll see you guys in the next video and or live stream.